what was that purchase process like? Where did they come from, right? So what channel? How quickly did they respond? How long was the sales cycle? What was the cost of sales? How did they move through to be a customer? How long did they stay? How much money did they spend? And how much margin did you make? Like, that's the formula.
Welcome to the morebusiness.com podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about ideal client profile. And joining me is Richard Brasser. He's the managing director of Carlton Richards. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Good to see you, Raj.
Yes. So Richard and I know each other from, I guess, maybe one or two companies ago. And he used to be with Boston Consulting Group and worked with some pretty big clients. And now he's actually develops playbooks and is helping other companies really expand their business and grow. And so one of the biggest things is to know who you're trying to reach. And that's the ideal client profile. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Richard, to get started, maybe just give a quick background on your career path.
Sure, absolutely. So in the early days, I was focused in the enterprise software industry, and we had created a solution that was designed specifically for sales teams and mainly at very large customers. So it solved the problem of not only compliance, but helping salespeople access content that they could then post through social. And the whole goal was to make it very targeted for account acquisition or lead acquisition. So we would connect the dots between your use of social and digital engagement and actual customers that came in and spent money. So it wasn't about brand and reputation and some of those things. So it was very focused on revenue. The interesting part was that we had, which was a very fortunate byproduct, the ability to work with some of the best companies in the world and their sales teams. We stuck around to do implementation with them hand in hand. So we really got to get an intimate knowledge of how do some of the best companies in the world, how do they operate? How do they leverage their strategy? How do they leverage technology? All of those different things. And so that was a real natural evolution of moving to Boston Consulting Group, where I helped lead our next gen sales practice. So that was really taking the world's biggest companies and helping them leverage some of the emerging technologies, leverage new processes, new ways of doing things, new ways of thinking. So, that was about 5 years. And now I'm trying to bring it to a slightly smaller market. So smaller companies that, even though those large companies have very similar problems, I found kind of middle market companies and companies in that growth stage, they're very, very exciting. But a lot of times they maybe just don't know a few things they can do, which can really supercharge their business. And I'm really excited about being back in that realm.
Yeah. And it's exciting because a lot of the stuff that you learned about how these big companies build that scalability is very applicable to these smaller organizations with just a small few tweaks. And so we're going to talk about that today. And I'm excited because, boy, getting your ideal client profile right is, if you get that right, everything opens up. But if you get it wrong, oh, you're going to struggle, right?
Absolutely.
That's the biggest thing. So could you break down what are the core components of an ideal client profile? What's important there?
So I might take a little bit of a left turn from the question. I think it's the right question, but what I want to try to focus on, you can Google ICP and get lots of lists and different parts to it. And I want to kind of focus on a few things that are very unique, right? We all know that there are a lot of different things when we can start to develop our ideal customer profile. I like to think of kind of the base attribute or the base things in a kind of three buckets. I call them attributes. These might be things that differentiate that business from another. So things like the geography, where are they at? What market? What industry are they serving? How many employees do they have? Revenue, total revenue, particular market position, the support that they need, a purchase process, things like that. It's what a lot of people think and a lot of people finish in their ICP, right? It's these kind of firmographic, technographic, and even a new term that I learned a few months ago was exographic. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. But then the second is kind of behaviors. How does the company behave? And I think this one often goes overlooked. And it's a very important one, especially when you're talking about your ability to sell to those clients. So things like, you can pick up on signals. How do they engage in the marketplace? Do they have thought leadership? Are they active in the marketplace? Do they go to conferences? Things like that. Those are all ways that allow you to align with maybe how do they purchase. Is it a very like GE Capital, right? That's a very arduous purchase process, right? It's a big committee and it's lots of people, and that may not be what a smaller company needs. Or are they very nimble? Is the CEO the person that really is going to make a decision? So those kind of things are really critical. When you get to what I call assets, those are things that are a little bit less tangible, but sometimes are super important, especially if you're at that kind of growth phase where you really want to accelerate. And for me, those are things like strategic fit, right? What market are we really trying to take over, or having a good footprint in? Is it a new market? Is it a new product? Kind of what are the go-to-market synergies that we may have with certain kinds of companies? Are certain kinds of companies, how are they funded? What is their capital structure, right? Are they going to be very difficult to spend money, or are they a little bit less worried about capital? Maybe they're private equity backed or they're public, and that's a different profile. And then also kind of what's their growth, right? Is this, in our situation, we were driving revenue with a software product. If a company was really focused on growth, that became a really good indicator that that's a good fit, as opposed to a company that's growing at 4 to 6% year over year over year. That's a slightly different thing. But the kind of broken record warning that I'm going to have today is what I think is the most important aspect, and everything starts to feed down into that. And that's really where you're focused on value. So there's a whole practice called value engineering, and there's different parts to it, but it's questions like, how is the company's use of your product? How are they going to gain financially, operationally? What is it going to mean to them as far as how do they realize the value? And then break that down for everybody in the organization as well, right? And so that you might have a financial buyer. Is your product going to help them make their numbers goals? You have operational folks, where are you going to make their day-to-day life easier? There are sales goals, et cetera, et cetera. So you can break down really how does the value that your product, why does it exist? How is it going to serve that customer? And when you focus on value, I think everything kind of cascades down into the other attributes and the other pieces a little bit nicer. And it really starts to drive the culture of your company, the culture of your sales organization, marketing, support, et cetera. So let me
Those
pause
are,
there because I know
yeah. Well, those are some pretty deep questions that you have to ask about your market so that you gain a better understanding of why would they even buy from you, right? And so oftentimes people will just say, well, I just need to pick up the phone and start talking to people and showing a demo. And that's not really if you start doing that, you're putting the cart before the horse. You really need to understand the whole buying considerations. Why would someone even talk to you? So what does a document like this look like? Let's say you start answering all of the questions. What does success look like for the financial buyer, the manager, the end user, all the different personas that collectively make up the influencers who would buy your product? And we're talking about enterprise sales here. So what does that final document actually look like?
So that's a good question. I think, to clarify one particular thing, I think a lot of times what I see are companies being a little bit too simplistic about an ICP, meaning they try to come up with one that encompasses all of their products or their services, and you literally could have a different ICP for almost every single product. And then you also have to really think about segmentation, right? And so I know we're going to cover some other topics and other sessions we're going to do, but if you're segmenting the market, your ideal customer in a middle market may be very different than an ideal customer in a enterprise market, based on your own capabilities, your own knowledge, your credibility in the marketplace, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you think about, so let's just assume we've figured out a segment. We really understand that segment. We're selling to a particular, geography, certain size company, et cetera. Then you're filling in not just a document that outlines, the other aspects of how that company buys, how it fits with your firm, et cetera. But really what you're doing is you're designing your entire go-to-market strategy from the first touch until literally high-fiving a 5-year LTV, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
because and I think that at the heart of this starts to get your org model and your teaming model and things like that, which we can touch on in a second. But it really is thinking through, all right, from the very first touch, because if I go into a company, almost invariably, big or small, they have, everybody says they need more leads, right? I rarely find they need more leads. What I find is that they need better leads that are better fit to what they're delivering from value. And so our work on that is really focused on getting as much information and data from what's happened in the past. A lot of times that's where companies start, right? And that's another rabbit hole where we can go down when we get to kind of technology and capabilities. But it's not just what happened in the past. And I'll have a good story in a minute about how companies make a mistake on that. But you at least have to understand the historicals. Who has bought the quickest for the lowest amount of cost, who stays the longest, is the happiest, et cetera, et cetera. And so outlining those particular aspects and then thinking about how does that permeate through the entire org design. So how does demand generation use that? How does your thought leadership and your blog touch on those characteristics that are your number one most valuable thing you exist for? Mm-hmm. How do your team members hand off to each other, right? Because the whole marketing's over here and sales is 7 miles away. It just doesn't work anymore. As buyers, we become so much more informed and so much we expect a seamless process. So from first touch to customer success, all of that has to be woven together. And it's a really complex and comprehensive kind of 360-degree process, not just a document. It's everything. It's in your culture. It's in your operating principles, etc. But if you think about it as kind of the virtuous cycle, to where from the very first step to interacting with each part of your sales org through the not only sales process, but then as an existing customer, to renewal, to et cetera, to them doing commercials for you. I'm only in B2B, so I don't know anything about
it. Well, a lot of the audience is B2B, but for you touched on something really critical, which is basically ensuring that your entire team from different departments really is aligned, because that goes to the heart of land and expand strategies, account-based marketing, and really just having that customer that just keeps renewing year after year because they're having such a seamless, happy experience. Well, I mean, what do you do to get your team fully aligned from all these different departments? What kind of coordinations are needed, and what could a CEO do to make sure that all of that happens smoothly?
Yeah, there's a few different strategies, and I think they are different. And I know we'll start to parse out the differences between large organizations and some of the challenges, or smaller organizations, et cetera. I think there are things that you can do which are more structural, and there are things that you can do that are more manual, right? And so maybe I'll start with one of my favorites, is that the classic problem of a BDR is overqualifying leads because that's what their metric is, right?
That's how they get paid.
Yeah. Salespeople get it. They go, these leads are not good, so they don't call them. Yeah. But the salesperson gets their own leads and lies to the people and tells them their product does everything in the world. Customer success gets that customer and is said, Raj told you what? It's
yeah. I'm laughing because I think anybody listening to this that has gone through the process, they're like, yep, I can relate to that. Yeah. Because it happens to everybody. Yeah.
It really does. It really does. And one of the things that we found to be very, very powerful, and we've done this across many different industries, customer segments, et cetera, is to organize the sales, the go-to-market team in pods. And something interesting happens right away, because you can do this, like I said, manually. You can talk through how they need to communicate and how they need to be responsible to the next person in the cycle. But if you organize a pod where you have lead generation, you have sales, maybe pre-sales, sales engineering, marketing, customer success, service and support, and they're in one group, and all of their KPIs, all of their the ways that they make money all align to customer success, right? So the customers, buy quickly for the least amount of money, stay the longest, et cetera. And when you have the kind of accountability to where if the customer success person is in my pod and I'm sitting next to them, almost every day, or at least every Monday or
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday,
Mm-hmm.
and it's immediate feedback. Like, you said that our product does X, Y, and Z. We all know it
Yeah.
doesn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That gave me a really unhappy customer when we're doing the install, and that's when they should be excited.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so just the organizing principle of that is really powerful. But if you take that, and I've gone into some big organizations and said, hey, this is the ideal way of doing it, and they said, there's no way we can do that quickly or
Yeah.
easily. I
Yeah.
said, but let that be a guiding principle. So you can virtually, maybe through dotted line org design, or just through experience sharing, start to get people to understand the other roles. Because if marketing understands, oh, this is why salespeople either really like a lead or why they don't, or what's a heartburn, what's not, they can start
Mm-hmm.
to really have an understanding of the other roles within the company and start to figure out that they're on the same team serving the customer. That's it, right? They
Yeah.
are delivering value for the customer. It is not about you making your number. Because if I'm a fantastic convincer, right, and I convince you to buy something, but then you churn and we spend all this time and effort, and 3 months later or a year later, you're not a customer anymore, I am not doing the company well, and I'm not doing the customer well, right? That's why it always comes back to that value.
Yeah, I think in a very small company, there's probably not a lot of, let's say, space between who you're
Right.
talking to. So the marketing and salespeople, they can probably talk to each other a lot faster. But it's pretty quick as you grow, because when you grow, those silos start to form very quickly.
Really quickly.
And yeah, and sometimes, boy, that's just really tough. Oh, sales said this, customer success said this, and it gets to be that problem. So I like the idea of just kind of stirring the coffee a little bit and putting
Right.
something here and something there, and you get everybody sitting next to each other. So that's a great way to get team alignment. What about the way people structure compensation plans? I mean, that seems like that's another point of maybe a weak link, point of failure. I don't know the right way to phrase
Well,
it, but it's one of the issues.
I think what's interesting about it, and in full disclosure, I didn't do a lot of compensation work. A lot of it would fall in our lap because it people will do what you compensate them to do.
Right.
Period.
Yep.
We know that. Everybody knows that. I think if I look at all the other aspects in kind of capabilities and technology, et cetera, I think compensation has lagged behind as far as sophistication, right? And so, we know all the different classic models, right? Is it base plus commission plus spiff plus, management by objective and MBO bonus? Those things are fairly pedestrian as far as how they incentivize people's behavior. I think if you
Mm-hmm.
start to think about that org model once again as a pod, you start to have the ability to have shared bonus pools, right? And so even folks that are not in the front lines making sales, you can have a group kind of compensation that starts to it be delivered when the customer has a great experience, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, like I said, I've seen some unique strategies in how certain roles are compensated. I think I've seen more things that I go in and say we shouldn't do that. Right. Perfect. Or one example: a sales engineer at a particular company was literally compensated as a commission. And so when their product that they were an expert for was sold, then they got comped, and they had a quota. Well, as an
Hmm.
expert, as a technician, you are delivering your value by how much you know about it, and you should be 100% Switzerland, right? You should be
Mm-hmm.
non-opinionated about which product. And where it really came out as a big problem, which is kind of a strange situation, was a salesperson was trying to construct a sale of 5 or 6 different products,
Hmm.
and they may want to throw one product in for free. Overall, it's the best deal for the company, but yet
Yeah.
this technician, the sales engineer, didn't want theirs to be non-comped. So it's
Yeah.
I think when you think about how people are compensated, I think it all the way down the rabbit hole. because
Yeah.
there's a lot more conflicts than you think.
Yeah. Um, Getting back to the point of nailing down your ICP to go from, as the title of this podcast is going from vague to vivid. So, what kind of gaps do you often see as people go through and start asking these questions to their existing client base to inform what their future clients should look like, prospects should look like? What are the gaps? Maybe some examples you can share about how people identify those gaps and how they fill them.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, I think that when you think about big companies, small companies, there are very similar challenges. What's one of the more interesting ones to me is that I think the gap of only taking historical data, so what has happened in the past,
Mm.
leaves out a huge opportunity for other markets, other customers.
Yeah.
So if you've been around a long time, maybe you have tried lots of different things, but the world is ever changing. I mean, one very large financial tax preparer company had an interest in growing revenue from new segments, new customer segments. But they said, but our ICP has identified this process, which identifies these kind of people as our customers. I said, well, you've done a pretty good job of going after them, right? So you want this new ramp in revenue, but you want to do things the exact same way. I said, let's think about this differently. Are there is there a customer base that absorbs information differently in a different place, gets different recommendations from maybe different professionals, right? It wasn't just their accountant. And so starting to think through where are those new opportunities, where are those new pools. It's kind of like I remember when social selling started. I was around at the beginning of that, and I used to describe it as, hey, you're catching fish all in these ponds over here. There's this really big pond that you don't even have a line in, like you're not even communicating in it,
Hmm.
and that there could be a lot of new customers. So I think the gap of thinking through the windshield as opposed to the review mirror is a really, it's an energizing way of doing things, because the gap of it kind of goes to pipeline management as well, right? So you look at everything that's happened in the past and how you're going to refine that. Well, you're only going to refine it as good as it ever was, right? And I've seen companies that have been around for 50 years and they're only as good as they ever were, and they'll
Hmm.
never be 5 times greater than they ever were because that's just not their process. So when we
Yeah.
would come in and talk about apply new data analytics, new ways of thinking, new markets, new strategies, like it really blew the cover off, because I mean, that's talk about vivid, right? You got
Yeah.
new groups of customers that are buying. That gets exciting.
How do people find who they should interview if they haven't gone after a segment before?
So that's an interesting question. I think so this kind of gets down into the heart of targeting and some of your target strategy. And I think if you have a culture of test and learn, I think you can take some very small probes. And I have one really interesting. It's an interesting for me. It's not probably interesting for
Mhm.
everybody. But so there was a commercial lending, commercial bank, and their entire strategy was a brick and mortar, right? So brick and mortar, you come in, businesses come in, take out loans, and they were experimenting with a new um, ability to connect with people digitally. But they were scared. They didn't want to put the resources into it. Didn't know if it would work. I said, "What? Why don't you just do something right in the middle, which is take a market where you don't have a bricks and mortar and try to engage a customer base there to see if there's interest, and do it purely out of justifying a new brick and mortar office. And but what you'll also find is that building the muscle of engaging your customers digitally is going to be something that you can then use everywhere. And you may even have, God forbid, an inside sales force that can actually transact and try to secure some of these loans. And that's exactly what happened. They went into different markets and found that there was a whole bunch of customers that were smaller but more nimble, more agile. They looked for recommendations on communities and other kind of peer groups. And they started, instead of doing a $200 million loan, they were doing an $8 million loan but they're doing bunches of them. And
Mm-hmm.
then that could grow into getting them enough, and then they put it in a bricks and mortar. So really doing kind of test and learn. I think other markets you can do. I'm not the world's biggest fan, but community grew like take a group of potential customers and do a study. We've done
Mm-hmm.
some of those before, but I really love having. It's kind of like Google had the take 8% of your time and try to figure out new products, and it's that innovation. Think through who has the attributes that would be even better served by our product,
I
and let's
think
do a few tests in that.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that smaller companies could really learn from the methodology that larger companies use is they will not go out and build a whole new product line, marketing campaign, whatever it is, to a segment without testing that segment would actually buy. And I think one of the mistakes I've seen many small companies do is like, I think that market should absolutely buy let's go pursue it. And I got to say, I almost made that mistake. I did make it once or twice, and I never make it again because now I know you don't actually build before you know you can sell it. So, small takeaway there for what that's worth. You mentioned something interesting because the way you would uh, approach selling a new segment may be very different than the way you're selling another segment because the way that segment buys. But that also may mean that even the segment that's buying a certain way right now might be very different 5 years from now. So it evolves, just
Right.
like, for example, nobody goes and buys every item of clothing in a retail store anymore. Half the shopping at least is probably done online. I know my wife says, I don't ever want to go to a store again. I just order it, return it, just a whole new way of buying, right? So that evolved. Um, what ways do you recommend companies monitor how their ICP is interacting with them so that they are ahead of the curve and they don't miss an opportunity, that they evolve with their ICP?
Yeah, I think that's kind of that constant evolution, and I think it's a tricky one because the standard, my standard kind of position on it is engage your customers, get feedback from them. What do they wish you did? What do they wish you had? Was there a better way to engage you? Would they have missed you if not for X, Y, and Z? You have to have a healthy filter, right? And you can set up kind of the guardrails so that you can't do the mistake that I've done a lot of times. And you just mentioned, going after a market that you don't truly know and going all 2 feet in.
Mm-hmm.
I did that quite often. I was in love with it, but I didn't realize that they were not our ICP.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you have to filter out. Customers will ask for everything, and it reminds me of two things. There are lots of things customers will ask for that they may or may not really need. It's not in their core value, right? It's not the thing that's driving them to really be excited or a raving fan about your product. The other part is there are things also that customers will never ask for that might be the best thing you could ever develop, and that's the old quote from Steve Jobs, which is no one
Mm-hmm.
was asking for an iPod, right?
Right.
we
Yeah.
were
Right.
we were asking for
uh,
better records and things like that. But
yeah.
so
Yeah.
but I think having that constant innovation culture, I think when it really starts to sing is like, think about that pod once again. When you get feedback from each different role within the company, and you get very, very different things. The engineers will say, this feature is the coolest thing we've ever built. No customer cares about it.
Mm.
Or they might have developed something that would be easy that it would change their entire experience.
Mm-hmm.
Sales may have a different idea. God, if we just had this, it would make my selling easier. Marketing will have different, service different. And so you can take all of those and really start to kind of boil them down into what's the one or two new priorities that we'll take on this quarter, and we're going to test and learn from it, right? We're not going to go 2 feet in. We learned a hard lesson on that about going into an industry where what set us apart was our kind of ability to work in a very, very large, complex environment and the compliance required for that. So if you had tens of thousands of salespeople all over the world, different divisions, et cetera, then our product was really valuable. if you were a small 4-person company, ours was not good at all, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I had this brilliant idea to go sell to a bunch of really small companies, or single operators. That
Mm-hmm.
didn't work too good.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You really got to make sure you nail it. So that brings up the question: how do you know when you've actually nailed your ICP?
Yeah. So this is when kind of the bridge to technology, analytics, reporting, and kind of what tech are you running? Um, there are some really cool new advances. I actually was just exposed to one called Rev.ai. They do an AI driven ICP, which is pretty innovative. It's pretty neat. Um, and and what they figured out was that the difference between, and this is that exographics. I think I'm saying it right. And the analogy they used was that Caterpillar and I can't remember what the other one was, but two companies that look very similar may buy very, very differently. And so when you have the analytics to really understand what was that purchase process like, where do they come from, right? So what channel, how quickly did they respond, how long was the sales cycle, what was the cost of sales, how did they move through to be a customer, how long did they stay, how much money did they spend, and how much margin did you make? Like those, like that's the formula. And when this
That
thing
sounds,
is,
my gosh, when you say it, everybody's like, oh, yeah. It sounds so obvious, but so few companies actually take the time to answer all those questions.
well, think
Yeah.
about a, yeah, I'm just going to make up an analogy. It's not going to be a good one, but think about like, offices all in a row with a view out the window, and you're trying to get a view. What does this whole scene look like? And each person has this little vantage point, and and I think that's what happens so often. We talk about silos, but you're saying, hey, what is driving marketing? What they
Hmm.
want is clicks and impressions and etc. Well, does that mean happier, longer customers? I don't know. All right. If they don't know, that's critical.
Right.
I did a
Right.
project for a very, very large tech company, and we found that they were spending $100 million on lead generation, which led to 0 customers. Now, that didn't mean they
Oh.
weren't making no sales. Their salespeople were doing also their own lead gen.
Mhm.
99.9999% of sales was coming through those, but they
Oh.
didn't know it because the way they did their funnel analytics, it actually took the leads the customers, the salespeople generated, and marketing, and dumped them in the same bucket. And so it was about 12% came from that bucket. Well, yeah, but nobody had analyzed which one came from what. And it
Mm.
wasn't like marketing was doing a bad job. They were doing beautiful stuff, and they actually had tremendous impact on brand reputation, brand recognition, things like that. But like the visibility of breaking down those walls and those silos to
Mm.
understand how somebody moves through, and how do they enjoy that process, right? Like when
Mhm.
we all hate, like we spent a ton of time maybe with a BDR talking to them, telling them our problem, telling them what we need, and then all of a sudden they're like, this is great, I'm going to get Joni on the line, and here you go. And Joni's like, great, Raj, how you doing, how can I
Yeah.
help you?
And we just
You're like,
start
oh my
all
god,
over
i just
again.
i
Yeah.
just spent 45 minutes telling
Oh.
Sarah,
Hmm. Oh gosh,
Um,
that's and it's so unfortunate. Oh my goodness. When you describe the all the transparency within an organization, which is not always there. In fact, many
right.
times it's just not even there, even in smaller companies. I've seen it. Um, well, let's say you got that ICP nailed. How does that help you with clarity and influence your entire go-to-market strategy? The answer might sound obvious, but I'll bet you've probably got some unique insights here.
Well, it's so I'm going to steal one. Somebody informed me, or I learned from somebody who was talking about corporate strategy. And this was an instructor up at Harvard Business School, and his opinion about ICP. And then where do you go from there? I think that was the biggest. Like, let's say you get one nailed. Say, I really know my customer. I really know who I serve. Now I want to grow, and
Hmm.
now I want to broaden the wings a little bit. And a lot of times what all of us do is they go like 40-degree difference, or like way over there, and they don't understand the market, they don't understand the customers. So the whole idea of taking your ICP and going literally one click, one click to either side. What's
Mhm.
something that's a little bit different, and testing some of that, right? So I might serve, companies that are middle market companies, X amount of revenue, X amount of employees, et cetera. And here are the reasons why they buy. Well, who looks like that? Who looks a lot like that, but they're not in that industry? And that's where you really get, you're doing less cycles of hunt, or of kind of fishing around and trying to figure out what works. If 90% of your attributes are the same, they just happen to be in a slightly different market. That's gonna serve you really well.
Very good. Richard, I'm looking forward to our next topic, which is going to be on segmentation. We're going to do that in a different
Awesome.
podcast. But I think right now, this is a lot of information about how you create your ICP and how you know if you've got it nailed down, because that will help you with your go-to-market strategy. I know you've got playbooks that you've developed. How can people reach you?
So the best way to reach is through carltonrichards.com. That's carltonrichards.com. And that's probably easy to get me. My phone number's on there as well. It's a new consulting firm, so I'm very excited about working with some slightly smaller companies, and seeing some of the exciting results.
Sounds very good. And I mean, the background you've got is very impressive, Richard. So I'd encourage anybody who's looking to really scale and expand their strategies. Richard's actually got some pretty neat playbooks and concepts that will actually help you find new markets and go after them. So
Well,
thank
and
you.
a big thank you to you to be a thought leader in the space. And I know when I was trying to grow and run a company, things like this, having resources and thought leadership like you're doing, it's a big deal. So thank you, and I know everybody else out there appreciates it a great deal.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. We're going to see you on a future podcast. And I'm going to have Richard back to talk about how you actually create segments. That's going to be a pretty cool conversation. So stay tuned.
Great.
Meanwhile, enjoy your day. We'll see you next time.